Well, we're joined now by Taoiseach Brian Cowen. Good evening to you, Taoiseach.
Good evening.
This morning, the European Union came up with a plan to try and save the euro from the possibility of collapse, as some people were painting it. The sort of sovereign version of what happened in September 2008 with banks in America and this side of the world. Were things as bad as that? Were we as close to the abyss over the weekend?
Well, I attended a meeting on Friday night and the purpose of it originally was to deal with finalising the operation for Greece, which was a series of bilateral loans, pooled bilateral loans between countries.
What does that mean, bilateral loans?
What we mean is country-to-country loans. So Ireland would, based on the European Central Bank key that we have, 1.64% of the total amount would be coming from us, and others have different percentages. So it was basically country-to-country loans to Greece. We were there to finalise those arrangements, and clearly what happened during the course of the previous few days, where the bond markets were freezing. I mean, as you say, sovereign debt was being questioned, the ability of governments to raise monies on the bond markets at prices which were sensible. In other words, the cost of the spreads beyond the German rate, which is the usual average that one takes, were starting to show significant increases for Greece. It was way out. I mean, they can't access these markets.
How was it getting that way for us?
Well, what had happened for us, not for us, but I mean, we'd seen an increase in the spread from 179 points up to 312, for example, over a couple of days. But the bigger issue was this, that Mr. Trichet had indicated that we had moved beyond the situation of the Greek problem, where there was a possibility of systemic risk, because if bond markets were frozen, and governments with deficits obviously have to get access to monies, and that's how they do it. So what emerged was a commitment by the European Council at that meeting that we were going to defend the euro, that we were going to do whatever was necessary to do that, to send that political signal, to use the weekend with markets closed to come forward with some specific mechanism that would give confidence to the markets that, you know, we were serious about defending our currency. And basically what emerged was a two parts to the process. First of all, the Commission coming forward with a proposal, a regulation adopted at the Finance Ministers' meeting last night, identifying 60 billion from within EU budget, which are sort of marginal expenditures that are not yet identified for a specific purpose. The first call of that 60 billion identified would be for the purposes of providing it to countries if they needed it. And secondly, obviously, that wouldn't be sufficient to convince markets. So the need then to come forward with what eventually emerged as a special purpose vehicle being agreed, whereby up to 440 billion could be raised by such a special purpose company that would go out and buy bonds in the market that would be guaranteed by states. So you basically had that, plus you had the IMF coming in saying that they would. Now, that 440 billion would be raised by euro area member states.
But sorry, is that going to be enough money? Because funnily enough, that 440 billion figure, isn't that exactly the amount of money that the initial bank guarantee in this country was supposed to cover? So if that size of money covers all the bank's deposits in a country this size, don't you need a massive multiple of that to look after events in Europe?
Well, I mean, as you know, the guarantees that we gave in Ireland, we've got money for, and that will emerge after September, what other guarantees will be provided beyond the initial 2-year period. But the point that I want to make in respect of this particular proposal is the view that it is a contingency measure. It is sending a signal to the market that the European Union is serious about defending the currency, and it's had that effect. I mean, obviously you have to continue to be vigilant, and you can't decide what the total response is in one day. But at the opening of markets today, we saw the euro strengthening. We saw stock market prices up. We saw bond spreads coming back to what they've been averaging last year. And so therefore, the response was right. We're seeing, in other words, bond markets unfreezing, if you like, and making sure that we wasn't heading the way it was heading.
Okay, but speculators often get a very bad press, and they're blamed for lots of things, and they were blamed for shorting the subprime crisis in the United States and causing the banking crisis. But speculators don't act on the basis of nothing. It was, for example, like Anglo-Irish Bank and Sean Quinn. The speculators got it right about Sean Quinn, that he couldn't pay his bets. So is there still the fundamental question here that there's still an issue in relation to whether countries in the European Union are in a position where they will be able to pay their debts? Has that issue been dealt with?
Well, the issue is being dealt with in a number of ways. First of all, as I say, the immediate response to the market situation was a very important short-term measure that had to be addressed and has been addressed very quickly in the space of 48, 72 hours by all 27 member states, which was a necessary and proportionate response, in my opinion, to what was emerging. But the second thing is, obviously, as you say, the question of reducing deficits, of convincing markets that there's a commitment by governments to stabilise and ultimately reduce their deficits, so that people are interested in providing money to governments through buying and purchasing bonds, whether it's government bonds or private bonds, that's a part of the correction process as well. And that is also something that's referred to in the statement by finance ministers. And there's also, of course, the other issue where the European Central Bank has, in its statement today, or last night, have confirmed that they're prepared to go in and buy bonds. That they're prepared to go in and purchase bonds as well, which is something that they hadn't been doing before. And the reason they're prepared to do that is to deal with those speculator elements who might be trying to just profit off it. But I take the point that there's also a structural issue here. And the structural issue is that governments have to show determination to reduce their deficits over a period.
Yeah, we're one of the pigs. Portugal, Italy, Ireland,
we're not in the same position.
Greece and Spain. Do you not think so? Do you not think that we're in a position that
there are people who refer to that unfortunate acronym at a time back in 2008, 2009, when we have had first mover advantage. We have moved, and we are being. It isn't accepted. Now, that's not to say for one moment that we're out of the woods, but what it shows is that you gain credibility internationally in these markets if you make these moves. I mean, we made changes in 2009 to the tune of 5% of GNP. We made changes to the tune of 2.5% this year. Now, we have more to go. I acknowledge and accept that. We have indicated that there are further issues, but we also are seeing the prospects of growth coming back into the economy, which has to be an important component in the correction process too.
Indeed, because there's so much there. If you think of it, that basically at the moment we have a gap of about 20 billion euro between the amount of money that we're taking in taxes and the amount of money that we're spending in the state, or the government is spending. How much longer can that go on for before borrowers say, we're not giving you this, particularly as we also know that on top of that money, that gap, you're also putting money into all the banks, the recapitalisation of the banks, money into Anglo-Irish Bank and lots of other things, which seems to have been dealt with on what you might call an off-balance sheet basis, but are real, and is still money that has to be repaid.
Yes, and luckily in some respects, even in the good times, we did reduce our debt to the point of 25% of GNP, and it gave us some headroom while we're seeing increasing indebtedness now, obviously, because of the deficits we've had to run. And to answer your question, of course it's not a sustainable position out into the short, medium or long term to have revenues coming in at 31 billion and spending at 51 billion. So the whole purpose here is agreeing with the European Commission how we reduce our deficits over a period of time that will enable us to make the changes without.
But that is likely to get tougher, given that since the crisis of September 2008, it's quite clear we've had an enormous amount of help and assistance from the European Commission in allowing us to run budget deficits, and the European Central Bank providing the money to our banks to make sure that the money comes out of the ATMs. Without them, we'd be completely banjaxed. But given now that they have a much bigger crisis to deal with in Europe than they thought they had only a month or two ago, are they likely to become much more stringent in the way that they tell you and our government, you have to do this, X, Y, and Z, and you've no choice about it, just get on with it?
Well, I think there's 2 points here. Everyone will have to, I acknowledge, you're going to have to see more economic governance in the sense that they don't want this to happen again, obviously. And so therefore you have to look at taking preventive measures rather than corrective measures. In other words, where it's starting to emerge, not just on the fiscal side, but if it's emerging in relation to competitiveness issues, or if there's other issues arising, where they need to be able to invoke, under Stability and Growth Pact, more effective sanctions, if you like, more effective measures, because at the moment it's a warning and then it's another warning and then it ultimately ends up with a fine. I mean, what they want to be doing in the future is by having perhaps governments, giving broad outlines of what their 3-year strategy would be, a response coming from the Commissioner, from peer review within the Council of Ministers on that, and then people having to adjust their budgets further. That's an issue that may emerge out of the talks that are going to start. There is a task force under the President of the Council that's beginning, and its first meeting is the 21st of May. And next Tuesday, and on the 12th of May this week, the Commissioner bringing proposals as to what improvements they want to see in respect of making the surveillance better.
But indeed, and maybe this is the wrong phrase to use, but hasn't the euro in some respects up to now been a bit half-arsed the way that they've gone about things? Because you've had the European Central Bank setting interest rates and setting interest rates very badly from an Irish point of view to regard to our needs. But the big problem with economic and monetary union has that there hasn't been centralisation of tax policies and various other budgetary methods. Isn't that the next likely step? That there's a lot of people, the architects of this particular currency and of Europe, will want to take economic sovereignty away from member states, particularly those who have performed badly.
Well, I don't think it's a question of taking economic sovereignty away, but it is a question of, I mean, the European project is about sharing sovereignty. It is about getting a more effective dialogue, or not a dialogue, but a relationship going at the European level and at the national level. That's true, because we don't want to be in this position again. And that's, I'm talking about the euro area can't be in this position again. So we saw in the Greek situation where people, if you like, you had a situation where the state was, first of all, this falsification of data, which was fundamental, but then there was also, people riding on the back of others who were playing by the rules before this financial crisis hit us. I mean, there were some people with deficits before we had this problem. Well, we've had a particular problem hit us because of that and other things. But if you look at the Greek situation, it was a question where people were riding on the back, if you like, of compliant countries in terms of the rules, and getting the benefits of low interest rates and the growth that came from that and the investment that came from that, until finally they were in a situation where the markets no longer believed it. So without credibility from the marketplace, you put at risk, even though Greece is just 3% of the total European economy, it showed the possible contagion effects it could have if we didn't make a move.
The €3 billion in further cuts you've already signalled for the budget at the end of the year, is that enough? And will they come early enough? Or will you be put under pressure by Europe to bring the budget forward like you did a couple of years ago, bring in tax increases more quickly, enforce more spending cuts more quickly?
Well, the question of acceleration of deficit reduction strategies, depending on the circumstances of every country, is not directed to Ireland. I mean, because Ireland have made moves, and Ireland, as I say, has been commended even over this weekend for the moves we've made. Now, it's all right taking that as for what it is, as I keep emphasising. It doesn't mean we're out of the woods. But what it does mean is, we have an agreement with them about the 3 billion reduction, as you say, in 2011, and a further 3 billion in 2012. We will be in touch with the Commission in due course, as we always are, indicating what our strategy is going to be in broad outline. But it is not being directed towards us at the moment. There's some other countries who have to make some moves on that.
So will there be any early budget?
No, there won't be an early budget. I mean, Brian then has made that clear.
And will there be more cuts than the 3 billion you've already set out that you want?
We have received no formal or informal indication from anybody that would be expected.
Might it be a good idea for us to, on our own initiative?
Well, on our own initiative, we of course will look in detail at everything, but we have a commitment to at least 3 billion. It's true.
What if you don't get the Croke Park Agreement through?
Sorry?
If you don't get the Croke Park Agreement into place, what will happen then?
Well, the Croke Park Agreement, I mean, it's a matter for union memberships now to consider with their own people on this. I think there's a growing realisation on reflection that, we do need the stability that this agreement can provide. I mean, we have to build domestic confidence in the country as well as having the international credibility for some of our budgetary strategy. We have to get the country behind the process as well. And there has been, when we took the decisions that we had to take, which were unilateral in nature, you're going to have a problem with how people would take that. But when you get into the Croke Park deal, it's about providing some income security for people. It's also about providing job security for people in the public service. But it's also being realistic to say, this is the best negotiated deal that is available at the present time. And I think, if you look at the Public Service Executive Union, if you look at, the Association of Irish Civil Servants, I mean, the majorities have been good in terms of a yes vote.
Irish National Teachers Organisation are protesting outside Croke Park today.
Well, people, you have the membership, every individual has to consider all this. And there are many people who work in the private sector who, live with people who work in the private sector. And it's, we don't live in sort of away from the realities that others in other sectors have to contend with. And I think one of the major things is that the public sector employees are looking for some certainty. They're looking for some idea where they're going over the next few years. And this agreement provides them that prospect.
Related to that, we've been talking about the national debt, the public debt, as in the government debt, during this interview. And we're getting back to a situation we were in the 1980s where it also fed into high unemployment and high taxes and the rest. But we didn't have high private debt in those times. What is the government doing to try and help people deal with the crisis of record levels of private debt?
Well, we have, made some changes in the budget regarding mortgage interest subsidies being provided for, particularly in the first 7 years of mortgages. So that's for those people who were in at the time at the high end of the pricing of property in the market over that period. Those people have been assisted to a greater extent than previous schemes provided. We also have a committee looking at this with the Department of Finance at the moment to see what else can we do to assist people, because I am very conscious, I genuinely am conscious of the fact that there are people who, whilst we haven't seen many repossessions, thankfully, certainly not in the covered institutions, and we have set in a code of conduct statutory now rather than just voluntary in respect of how people are to be dealt with, and giving people some time. The fact of the matter is, that issue is a worrying issue for many mortgage holders, and we are working through policy options there to see what we can do, but that is something that's an ongoing issue for us to try and deal with.
I know we're over time, I know you have to go, but I have to ask you one question. What do you think of Gordon Brown stepping down as leader of the Labour Party in Britain?
Well, I mean, I've just heard it on the way out here to the interview. I had a very good relationship with him, I have to say. I've admired him. I think he's been a good man to deal with from an Irish government point of view in terms of Northern Ireland, etc. He showed a lot of commitment to that issue, and one that he hadn't obviously been directly involved in much as Chancellor of the Exchequer before that. And, we will deal with an incoming government. I think the good point about it is whoever it is that we'll be dealing with, the British-Irish relations, I think, are on a far better and sounder footing now than before because of this co-guarantor status that we have in relation to the Northern Ireland agreements. And I think that we look forward to working with him, and I wish Gordon well.
Okay, who do you think will replace him?
You've got. I don't want
Prime Minister. Will it be?
I don't want to interfere.
Here's one I just tried out. Do you fear any parallels between yourself and Gordon Brown, Finance Minister who took over as leader?
No,
do you fear the election turning out for you the way it's turned out for him?
No more than you do with any other broadcaster who would simply be incomparable anyway.
Taoiseach Brian Cowen, thank you very much for joining us. We'll be back after this.